本集节目由永丰金控冠名赞助，翻转金融，共创美好生活，以新闻开启国际视野。永丰金控与您一同掌握全球脉动。大家好，欢迎收听联合开炮，我是郭崇伦。我们在这个礼拜有2集，我们会同时播出，一个是唐安竹，是现在目前在新加坡南洋理工大学担任研究员。那另外一位是何瑞恩。我们这一集跟何瑞恩的访谈，主要也在谈就是这一次大选里面的两岸的议题，以及美国对于中国政策未来的总统会有什么样子的新的方向。何瑞恩他现在担任布鲁金斯研究所中国中心的主任，是接替那个卜瑞哲的位置啊。那他也曾经在奥巴马时期担任白宫国安会中国、台湾跟蒙古事务的主任。那这个很有可能他在如果下一届是民主党执政的话，他会重返政府，那位置应该不会在助理国务卿之下，所以他的看法是非常值得注意的。我们现在就开始跟他的访谈。
I will start with the U.S. presidential elections question. With only 6 weeks to go, what issue do you think will have a decisive impact on the outcome of this election? Or do you think that now pretty much momentum had been set, that nothing would going to change the final result now?
Well, it's a very close presidential election, and I don't think anyone knows yet what the outcome will be. Or if anyone knows, they haven't told me yet. So I'm curious to find out. But my sense is that the American voters are predominantly focused internally. They're inward focused right now. They are looking at issues like inflation and immigration and crime and jobs. These are the issues that seem to be motivating voters the most right now. To the extent that foreign affairs factors into the debate, I think a lot of attention is paid to the wars in Ukraine and in the Middle East with Israel and Gaza, Israel and Hezbollah. And so those seem to be the top issues on the minds of voters right now. And then, you know, from President Trump's perspective, he wants to frame the contest as a contest between strength and weakness, and to argue that he represents toughness and strength in protecting the American people, and that Vice President Harris would be weak. Whereas Vice President Harris, I think, is trying to frame the debate around looking forward or moving backwards into the past. And so whichever one of those narratives sort of takes hold, I think will tell us something about the direction of the debate leading into the election.
In American politics, there's a saying about October surprise. Are you seeing the October surprise in the coming month, or it's pretty much settled right now? How do you think?
You know, it's a great question. This election has been so surprising already, with 2 assassination attempts against former President Trump, President Biden dropping out of the race. There's just been an incredible amount of volatility in this election. So I would be hesitant to say that everything is set and nothing will be surprising between now and the election. But what I would say is that I don't expect that any surprise that occurs to be a surprise that emanates from China. I think that the Chinese are very interested in trying to keep things as calm as possible and to not become any bigger of a feature in the election than they already are. So I expect that if there are surprises in October, they may be more homegrown surprises than foreign surprises impacting the election in the United States.
I'd like to turn the issue to foreign policy. President Biden's foreign policy is known for alliance building and multilateralism. But if Trump ever returns to the White House, his approach is usually be considered a more isolationist. How would that weaken the trust between the U.S. and its ally?
Well, my friend and colleague Richard Bush wrote a piece for Brookings last week where he described President Trump's foreign policy approach as disorganized, with contradictory tendencies and rhetorical inconsistency. And I think that probably explains a lot about President Trump's approach to the world. He follows his instincts. He believes strongly in certain things, such as the trade balance and in ensuring that other countries are not taking advantage of and free riding on the United States. And so I think that those are the types of issues that President Trump would care a lot about. And as we were talking about a moment ago, he likes to be viewed as tough and strong. And so he will want to present himself to the world, but also to the American people as someone who is demonstrating toughness in dealing with competitors and adversaries. And so I think he will always be looking for opportunities to demonstrate himself rhetorically and symbolically as being tough, but without much of a strategy or conceptual thought underneath the instincts that guide him.
So you don't even call him an isolationist in that term in the U.S. foreign policy tradition. You only said that he's more chaotic and disorganized, and hardly there's a consistent ideology behind it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's a consistent ideology, but there are a certain set of patterns in his behavior. He wants to be respected. He wants to get a better deal for the American people. He cares about being perceived as tough and strong. And the reason I guess I'm reluctant to describe him as isolationist is because when he was president before, America was active in the world. Just in a slightly different way, but we remain very active and very aware of our connections to the rest of the world. And President Trump took great pride in America being a leader in the world, even though his own actions undermined our leadership, I would argue, in many important respects by pulling out of key agreements and understandings. So I don't think that he's isolationist, but he certainly is more focused on domestic issues than other presidents have been before.
If Kamala Harris is elected, could the Biden's current approach toward China, a so-called competition with the guardrail, will still hold, or you think that she will have something of her own policy in China?
Well, I think that there will be broad continuity if Vice President Harris wins from the Biden administration to a Harris administration. I think that she will focus on certain issues. She'll focus on alliances and partnerships between the United States and its friends in Asia and in Europe. That will be sort of the cornerstone of her approach to foreign policy. I think that she would approach competition with China very much around the idea of investing inside the United States, investing at home to strengthen American competitiveness. I think that she would probably continue to emphasize the importance of values as an element of American foreign policy. But I think that there may be some slight differences between President Biden and Vice President Harris. And part of that just owes to their different experiences. You know, President Biden grew up during the Cold War. It was a very formative experience for him, where there is, a good side and a bad side. There's a black and a white, and it's very clear who's on what side. And so, President Biden, for example, talks about the contest between democracy versus authoritarianism. Vice President Harris doesn't talk as often in those terms. She's a little less ideological, I think. And that's partly a function of the fact that she grew up in a different era. Much of her professional experience is in a post-Cold War era, where the question was, how should the United States use its leadership to make the world a better place, to make the world a safer place for the American people? And so it's a slight distinction between the two, but I think it may prove to be an important one as time goes by in trying to understand where some of the distinctions might lie between President Biden Vice President Harris.
Let me ask you about the tariff issues. As we know that Trump had mentioned that he's going to raise 10% globally on tariff. What China is going to raise up to like 60% plus the 10% already exists. And it seems that Mr. Harris is not ruling out raising tariff as well, just like President Biden is not taking out any of the tariff being leveled on by President Trump. Do you agree that whoever gets elected as a U.S. president will definitely result to more tariff for a new round of trade war with China? And what would be the implication and challenges for globally because of that trade war?
I actually don't think that that there will be a trade war regardless of who wins the U.S. election. I think that tariffs are a policy tool that President Trump favors, a policy tool that President Trump thinks of as a magic wand that can solve problems for him. And so when he's asked how he would pay for childcare in the United States, he says tariffs. When he's asked how to lower healthcare costs in the United States, he says tariffs. When he's asked how to pay for infrastructure, he says tariffs. And so he thinks of tariffs as this, this magic wand that can solve any problem that he and the United States confront. I don't think that Vice President Harris looks at tariffs in the same way. I think she's much more targeted, much more limited, much more focused in how she would apply tariffs. And she would use them to protect industries in the United States that are going up against state-backed competition, unfair competition from China, and to try to level the playing field so that American companies can compete fairly against competition from China or other markets around the world. So I actually think that there's a pretty big distinction between how a Harris administration or a Trump administration would approach competition with China and the use of tariffs in that competition, and that it would be a mistake to assume that they would each use tariffs in the same way.
But for people from outside, it seems that President Trump is levying a heavy duty, a tariff China, and when President Biden get in office, he's not abolishing any of the tariff, reducing the tariff imposed by President Trump. And that seems to us, it seems to be a continuity on the tariff policy, or even you may say the protectionist policy of the U.S. trade deal. So how do you, to explain there's this kind of continuity between Trump and Biden?
Yeah, I think you raise an important and fair point. It is interesting that Joe Biden, when he was running for president, criticized Donald Trump for using tariffs arbitrarily and said that it was doing harm to American workers and American companies that rely upon imports from the rest of the world, including from China. And then, as you said, when Joe Biden became President Biden, he kept all of the tariffs in place and added to them in certain areas. And I think part of that owes to electoral politics. The fact that that President Biden was very committed to not appearing weak on issues relating to China, and wanted to not give an opportunity for President Trump or his supporters to attack him for stepping back or pulling back from competition. I guess what I'm trying to offer, though, is a view that the tariffs that are in place may stay in place for some time. They were not put in place as leverage to negotiate a better outcome. They were there to try to prevent China from flooding the American market with subsidized products that are unfairly priced, not using market factors. And as long as China continues to use the power of the state to subsidize its industries, I think that there will continue to be protections put up against Chinese imports. But President Trump views tariffs as a as something that solves big problems. I think Vice President Harris thinks of them much more narrowly and would use them for very specific purposes, as opposed to just sort of blanket use of tariffs on all countries, whether they're friend or foe, or massive tariffs upon China, because it's bad policy. It's dumb. It's inflationary. It hurts people like, my family would have to pay an extra $1,600 a year to live if President Trump's tariffs were in place. I don't want to pay $1,600 more a year to live my normal life. And so I think that that Vice President Harris is aware of that and would be reluctant to just copy and paste President Trump's plan and use it as their own.
Let me ask you about two international related crises that I think the U.S. president election is something that for the past half a year, everyone is paying a lot of attention to. The Israel Prime Minister Netanyahu now seem to be play into benefit by creating a mini crisis, not really a mini crisis, but a real genuine crisis in the Middle East. First started by, it seems that there's rumor there's going to be a war between Israel and Hezbollah. So what do you think that the Israeli government will have in mind, or the Hezbollah will have in mind, or the government or Iran will have in mind when they put their own interests in the calculation of this election season that is coming out from the American political changes? So what will benefit them or not benefit them in that sense?
It's a really important question, and I think the only people who can truly answer it are the leadership in Israel and in the countries and groups in the Middle East that are at war with each other. I don't know what their plans or their motivations are. What I do know is that neither of the presidential candidates wants to inherit a full-blown war and dramatic crisis in the Middle East when they become president on January 20th of next year. We know that either Vice President Harris or former President Trump will be president. One of them will be president in January of next year. It would be a horrible way to begin their presidency if they have to contend with a full-blown conflict and crisis. So my guess is that that both of the presidential candidates would prefer for this issue to calm itself down between now and next January, and hopefully find some type of resolution that allows us to turn the page and move forward. Whether that's going to happen, I don't know. I hope so, because I think we're all saddened and frustrated by watching the horrible events that are taking place in the Middle East.
Right. But there is a war that the new president will have to deal with, is the war of Ukraine. President Zelensky is coming to town and try to present his own victory plan to President Biden, and hope to talk with Vice President Harris and also former President Trump and ask for their support. But some people are saying that actually President Zelensky is sacrificing the line of defense on Donbas in order for advancement into a Russian territory of Kursk. And that is exactly the same scenario that we are seeing in Middle East. Try to create something that is going to be beneficial to itself, but also play into a presidential election of the United States. What's your thinking on the war in Iraq, in Ukraine?
Well, I would love to see the war end as soon as possible. It's gone on too long, and it's gone on too long because President Putin is committed to waging a war to try to redraw international boundaries through the use of force. Do I think that it's going to end between now and the end of this year? Probably not, because I don't think that the war has reached a point of mutually hurting stalemate where it has become too painful for both sides to continue the war. I think they're both capable of continuing the war and trying to get better terms, more leverage to be able to negotiate from a position of strength for the ultimate resolution. And so sadly, I think that that the war is going to go on for some time to come. And I don't think that President Putin would necessarily feel motivated to negotiate with a Biden administration that is going to be in office for only a few more months. And so from his perspective, I think that he probably believes that there's value in waiting to see the outcome of America's election and how the next administration takes shape before he begins to formulate his own thinking or negotiating plan for mediation and ultimately some type of end to the violence.
I'd like to bring the issue back to China again. The White House National Security Advisor Jack Sullivan made his first trip to China in late August, and possibly they're going to arrange or maybe two summit going to be arranged for the legacy of President Biden's China policy. But what exactly are they going to talk about in the summit, and what kind of legacy do you think that President Biden would like to create for his own China policy?
It's a good question. I don't know how the Biden administration thinks about their legacy on China policy, but my assumption is that they would like history to remember them as having taken actions that are very competitive to push back against Chinese predations against their neighbors, but also at home, at the same time as being able to establish some degree of stability and predictability and durability in the U.S.-China relationship. And that the Biden administration would like to be viewed as having put the United States in a stronger position to compete with China over the long term than the situation that they inherited from President Trump in January of 2021. And I think that they have a compelling case to make for having done so. They have strengthened America's alliance relationships with countries in Asia and around the world. They have really solidified the quadrilateral group that involves the United States, Australia, Japan, and India. They have created the AUKUS alliance that involves the United States, Australia, and the United Kingdom. The relationship between the United States and Taiwan is stronger today than it was in 2021. And the United States has invested considerably in itself at home. And American companies are at the leading edge of innovation on critical industries such as artificial intelligence. And so I think that that all in all, nothing is perfect, but the situation that the United States is in today in its competition with China is stronger than it was when the Biden administration entered office in 2021.
You just talk about within the U.S. Policy on China, there's a crucial element of U.S. relations with Taiwan. China have been mentioned about Taiwan over and over again, saying that the cooperation, especially the security cooperation between Taiwan and the United States, is something, a red line that China cannot tolerate. And my question is, there's a debate on strategy of ambiguity and clarity in Washington, D.C. regarding how should U.S. should show its commitment to Taiwan. But in terms of this kind of military and security cooperation, would that also become a subject for discussion or even debate? Meaning that how much military cooperation we should have with Taiwan? Is China meaning that if a port call would be considered a bridge or a step over the red line? What do they mean by that? And care about China red line argument, or we should do whatever it takes to help Taiwan? Well, what's your thinking on this?
Well, I think that the United States should be responsible in the way that it approaches the situation in the Taiwan Strait. the situation in the Taiwan Strait is one of the most sensitive issues on the world stage. But America has been pretty clear for a long time at what its fundamental interest is, which is in preserving peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. And figuring out the best way to do that, as you suggested, is more art than science. There is no mathematical formula that tells us exactly what we should do. It requires judgment and adaptation and flexibility and thinking. And when we are most concerned about peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait being disrupted from Chinese military pressure on Taiwan, then the natural response from the United States is to strengthen its own military presence, as well as Taiwan's capacity for self-defense, to try to preserve an equilibrium in the Taiwan Strait. And in the past, we've been concerned about instability emanating from Taiwan during the administration of Chen Shui-bian. And during that period, the United States used different policy tools to try to maintain its goal of preserving peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. And on your question about red lines, I think that the Chinese have been deliberately vague in defining what precisely would constitute a violation of a red line. But we've known for decades the broad outlines of what the Chinese are most sensitive about. Because we negotiated 3 communiques between the United States and China on issues that involve Taiwan. And if you look back at that record, the 3 issues that the Chinese were most sensitive about were: 1, if the United States were to recognize the Republic of China as an independent state; 2, if the United States were to reestablish a formal treaty, a security treaty, between the United States and Taiwan. And then 3 would be if the United States were to station and position on U.S. troops in Taiwan. So those, I think, have been pretty consistent points of emphasis and points of sensitivity for China about how the United States approaches its relationship with Taiwan. And we should be mindful of those as we contemplate and consider the best course of action to protect our interests, which is in preserving peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait.
Okay, my final question is also related with the tension now happening in the South China Sea between China and Philippines. And because it's very near Taiwan, people here are very concerned. Is it possible to contain the tension, or is it bound to escalate into a regional conflict or even war between China, Philippines, or even Philippines' ally, United States? And how would that affect the Taiwan Strait, or in that matter?
It's an important question. I hope there's enough wisdom to be found in Washington, Manila, and Beijing to not allow competition over issues like Second Thomas Shoal or South Laconia Shoal to spiral into a conflict. That would be a tragedy. It would be deeply unfortunate for all involved and for the region and the world if there were to be a conflict. I think that the United States has really sought to help reinforce and clarify for Beijing's understanding that we, the United States, care deeply about the credibility of our alliance commitments and are determined to uphold them. And the hope is that that will induce sobriety in Beijing about how far and how aggressively they push the situation in the South China Sea. At the same time, we've been clear and consistent with our friends in Manila about what we hope to see happen and the ways in which we can support the preservation of stability in the South China Sea. I remain cautiously optimistic that cool heads will prevail and that all 3 sides will take a rational interpretation of their long-term interest and conclude that it would be an act of strategic folly to find ourselves at war over these issues. But as your question pointed out, this is a serious issue that requires constant vigilance. And so I don't think anyone is taking it lightly. And we'll have to see. But I am cautiously optimistic that we will not see war in the South China Sea anytime soon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hess. I know you are a regular visitor of Taiwan, and maybe we can meet next time in Taipei. Thank you very much.
Well, I look forward to the opportunity to meet you in person, hopefully over a glass of coffee or a nice meal. But
That'd be nice.
It's been a great conversation. I enjoy being in touch with you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hess.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
上网搜寻 VIP.UDN.com 到联合报数位版，看更多精彩的报道。